Thank you. Well, now we're official. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, please, ma'am. We talked a little bit about taking, this seriously. We got to collaborate. So here's our inspirational quote for today. There is nothing we can't do if we work hard, never sleep, and shirk all of our responsibilities in our lives. And this is a little Leslie Knope for us. In humor, we know that everybody's working super hard, but this whole universal meals, free meals, or free school meals for all is gonna take all of us. So we are doing our best to bring us to the table to talk about how we can collaborate and work together to rise up to the opportunities and challenges of feeding all of California's children school meals next year for free. All right, let's look at our agenda. Let's see. Oh, good. I'm staying on target. So 2 o'clock, meeting welcome and start. Little housekeeping. We're going to mute you all as standard practice on the upfront. But that doesn't mean we don't want to hear from you during the Q&A. And yeah, that's it for housekeeping. Ask your questions in the chat. We're going to be monitoring the chat. These meetings, if you haven't been here before, are candid and lively. And the only thing we take seriously is the policy and feeding kids. So we enjoy a robust and candid conversation here. First up, in our presentation will be Sally Spero from Lunch Assist. She's going to talk about verification and resources. Next up, we're going to have Robin Hernandez from No Kid Hungry. And then at 2:15, we're going to have Gurjeet from California Department of Education. You know him, you love him. And then at 2:30, we're going to have Jess Bartholow from the Office of Senator Skinner. And at 2:40, we're going to have a lively and candid Q&A. So hold on to your questions because we'll be sourcing them from the chat and we'll even, you can ask directly too. All right, so first up, Ms. Spero.
Hi, everybody. Good to see you guys. And if this is October, it must be verification time. So just want to let you know that at Lunch Assist, we have come up with a verification checklist that you can have access to make sure that you haven't forgotten any of your steps. And just as a reminder, if you collected applications, you have to do verification. And if you didn't, you only have to do the verification report. If you're a member of Lunch Assist Pro, there are some additional resources in the collective, some sample letters and ideas for filling out the report correctly and so on. So you can also check those out as well. Now, just in the checklist, of course, and in all the requirements, they say you need to send people 2 letters when you do. But for me, that's just the beginning, because if you read the fine print, you'll discover that the lower no response rate you have, the fewer you have to do in the future. So I took the viewpoint that there was no such thing as no response. I was going to get that response. So you should also thinking about, can you call the people on the phone? Can you ask the child's teacher to help get the materials back in, or the school secretaries? They can pull some miracles off from time to time. And we, most years, manage to get just about everybody in and have the no response rate be down to 0 some years, or 1 or 2. And it seems like a lot of work, but again, you're going to save yourself a lot of work in the future with having a good no response rate. And I'm as guilty as everybody of getting the mail and kind of looking through it during the week and maybe reading it. And maybe reading a letter from the school that looked important and deciding that I should do that on the weekend, and then sleeping in and going to go see the James Bond movie. So, the parents, they need some help remembering. I always do. But at any rate, we hope that the checklist will at least help you have your reminder so that you can be successful this year. You can also check out on the Lunch Assist our blog, which has some solutions to supply chain disruptions, or at least some ideas. And we also have an alert poster that you can print up and communicate with parents on how you're doing with supply chain disruptions and what they might expect. So sorry about that coughing, but I think that's everything going on with Lunch Assist for this meeting. And I will turn it back over to our hostess.
Thank you, Sally. We know you used to serve your milkshake and not stir it, right? Gotta have James Bond.
Drive around in that car.
Will you please also include your lunch hour invite information or link in the chat? Those hours are really valuable. And thank you to Lunch Assist for continuing to provide beautiful space for the whole nation to connect now. So it's really exciting.
Yeah, a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you for being here.
Okay.
All right. So next up is Robin Hernandez from No Kid Hungry.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Can you guys hear me okay? Awesome. So yeah, thank you for allowing me to join you today. I'm the School Meals Access Manager from No Kid Hungry, and I'm here to tell you about an opportunity that's going to be coming your way this school year. So we're all very excited about California implementing universal meals. And as many of you already know, the CDE has announced its mandate for schools with an ISP of 40% or greater that they must apply for a federal provision such as CEP or P2 by June 30th of 2022. So as you know, operating CEP has many benefits, but you may not know that there are still a lot of benefits for operating it while universal meals are in place. You still get to enjoy the reduced admin burden benefit, streamlined counting and claiming, more seamlessly implementing alternative meal programs like Meals in the Classroom or Grab and Go meals as an example. So as a response to this, our No Kid Hungry team is proudly presenting our CEP Work Group 2.0. This is kind of a rehash of our second year of operating this work group. And it's basically a series of workshops for nutrition directors. We're going to begin in January 2022, and it's going to help you to prepare for this transition to CEP, whether you're doing it district-wide or for individual schools. And it's led by peers and experts and gives you a chance to have some one-on-one support, active discussions, and do a deep dive on topics like the ones you see on in the column on the left. So we really hope you can join us. Can we go to the next slide, please? It was a big hit last year, and it's hopefully going to be bigger and better this year. And I just want to make note that these workshops are intended to complement and support the CDE sessions, which I know they're going to be hosting those monthly as well. So please do make sure you attend the CDE sessions, and then you can follow up with us for some more in-depth conversations. In our meetings, you're also going to learn how to use the Meals Count strategic grouping tool and have some idea sharing opportunities with peer districts. Another great part about participating in the meetings is that you can get connected with the No Kid Hungry network of free support. We have program managers who work in every region of California who can help you when it comes to all child nutrition programs. And if you consider your district already good to go and well-versed in CEP, then please contact us to sign up, and maybe you can be one of our presenters or peermen. I'm going to be sending out some information in the coming weeks, and I will also put the information in the chat for you if you are interested in getting involved in the work group. And with that, I'll pass it back to you, Amanda.
Thank you, Robin. We can't recommend the CEP work group enough. What a fantastic resource, and just a really collaborative, kind space to just learn and also practice the learnings. So thank you for that. It's a really great service that No Kid Hungry is providing throughout California. So thanks for bringing it to the San Diego crew. We hope to see lots of San Diego districts in there. All right, next up, Gurjeet with the Universal Meals Overview. Turning it over to you, sir.
Thanks, Amanda. Just let me get my slide deck up here. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Gurjeet Barayah. I'm a manager in the School Nutrition Programs Administration at CDE. I hope some of you guys probably joined us on our kickoff listening session a couple weeks ago, but if you missed it, I'm going to cover a lot of the same stuff that we talked about, just giving an overall overview of what is in store with universal meals in school year 22-23. So first off, the universal school meals really were authorized by the state budget, Assembly Bills AB 130 and 167. And there are three kind of primary components that are critical to making sure that universal meals in California, get off to a really strong start. The first piece of that is updating the state meal mandate. The second piece, and Robin touched on this in her CEP work group piece, is the requirement that certain districts that are eligible participate in a federal meal provision program. And then number three, and of course, very critical, is making sure that the funding is there for schools to be able to provide these meals to children. So I'll break down each one of these three components over these next couple slides. That first piece, the update to the state meal mandate, it essentially enhances the state meal mandate that is already in place. So beginning in school year 22-23, schools will have to provide both a breakfast and a lunch to all students that ask for a meal. So where these changes really, how this changes compared to what we currently have is that districts need to only provide one meal, either a breakfast or a lunch, and that requirement only applies to needy students. This essentially takes all those components away. It's got to be a breakfast and a lunch, and it's got to be offered to every single child at that school site. And that goes into effect in school year 22-23. The second piece of the requirement is the federal meal provision requirement. And this states that any school that has an identified student population, an ISP of 40% or more, has to apply for a federal feeding provision. Now, we had a lot of questions around this in our listening session on universal meals. And I think the confusion came around the mention of an ISP, but also covering multiple provision options. Essentially, the qualifier is if you have a school site that has an ISP of 40%. If the answer to that question is yes, then by June of 2022, you have to apply to be on a federal provision. That could be community eligibility, it could be provision 1, provision 2, or provision 3. But the qualifier is that you are eligible to at least participate in CEP. The mandate says that you've got to be on a provision, but the local still has the choice of which of those provision options fit best for their district. Robin talked about the benefits of going to community eligibility and the streamlined administration. We certainly agree with those. And with community eligibility, you also get the multiplier. So the real intent behind this requirement is to make sure that the Universal Meals Program in California is set up in a manner that we are supplementing federal reimbursements that come into the state. We don't want to be supplanting one pot of money with another. And so having this requirement in place really helps us to accomplish that. And then the third piece, and again, we know this is very important, is to make sure that we have the funding that is going to be necessary for this program to be successful. So the Universal Meals Program has earmarked $650 million to provide supplemental state funding for schools that participate in the program. There are some caveats to this, of course. Districts, in order to be eligible to receive these funds, they have to participate in the federal programs. That means you are approved to participate both in the school breakfast program and the National School Lunch Program. Again, that ties back to what I just mentioned about making sure that we're setting this up in a manner to supplement what federal funds are already coming into the state for these programs. The second piece is that the meals that you serve have to continue to meet all federal and state requirements for school breakfast and national school lunch. So you have to meet the meal pattern requirements. There's not a, I know right now we are living in a world where we've got a lot of challenges with supply chain and whatnot. But once we move past that and the waivers are no longer in play, you've got to be able to meet those federal meal pattern requirements. We want these meals to be nutritious for children. It's not just a matter of getting them a meal, it's a matter of getting them a nutritionally adequate meal. And then number three, the intent really is for those $650 million in funds to cover the gap between what a school would receive for free meal reimbursement versus what they would receive for a reduced price meal or for a paid meal. So on this slide that you see here, we've kind of just sketched up an example of what the universal meals reimbursement could look like for a school district. Now, the numbers I've used on this, we use the national school lunch reimbursement numbers from the current school year, and we assume that this district would be eligible for the additional 7 cents. And so, you'll see for the reduced priced and paid categories, that gap between what you would receive for those meals versus what you would get for a free meal is going to be filled in with that universal meals funding. So for every meal that you serve that's reduced priced, you get an additional 36 cents and change from the state on top of what you're already getting from the feds and the Prop 98 other state funds. For the paid meals, that goes even further. Right now we know that paid meals don't receive very much federal support, and they don't receive any state support. And so the same thing, you'd get, almost, $3.56 for each paid meal that is served to ensure that you have the reimbursement necessary to be able to provide a universal feeding model to all of your students. Of course, as we go, these federal fund amounts will continue to change, but the goal really is to make sure that districts are getting the maximum free meal reimbursement for every single meal that's provided. Some areas that we know that folks have kind of raised that we are going to need to provide additional technical assistance are on the screen here. And I'm sure there are areas that we haven't thought of. So I'll get to our universal meals inbox and how you can kind of share those for us to work through as we develop guidance. We know that there's going to be some questions and challenges around non-classroom based charter schools, those schools that are providing kind of a virtual instruction and kids are primarily not on campus. Private and non-public schools, are not subject to California Education Code requirements. And so addressing, the need for folks to have some support if they want to participate in the program. The question around minimum days and how can we get to providing 2 meals for kids when they're only on campus for a couple of hours. The big question that folks always have when we talk about revenue is there going to be enough funds, and what happens if the funds aren't sufficient? And then number 5, really kind of, the overarching challenge I think that everybody is facing is really the labor and supply chain shortages and how are those going to impact universal meals, and what are some strategies that we can implement to make sure that we can, do that song and dance and make sure that we still get off to a healthy kick in school year 22-23. So kind of as we work through, the rest of this winter and into the spring, the commitment that we're really making at CDE is that, we're going to continue to provide a lot of outreach and support, especially for those folks who are looking to expand their meal services and those folks who are new program sponsors. Amanda and I, just for the start of this call, we're talking about, we had a lot of participation from schools that historically have not participated in the federal meal programs. And that is, that's very exciting, and also an area that we know that we'll need to get those folks, some targeted technical assistance to get them on the program and get them up to speed. We are hosting regular listening sessions, and those really serve as a great tool for us to both gather input from folks. I mean, thankfully to technology and Zoom, we had almost 900 participants, all providing feedback to us at that first meeting. And then it also just gives us an avenue to continue to share updates as we have, as we get new information available. Our next listening session is scheduled for November 2nd at 2 p.m. I'm really excited to share that we will have both State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tony Thurman, as well as State Senator Nancy Skinner joining us for that listening session. And we'll also have some partners from No Kid Hungry and Nourish California and the Nutrition Institute, speaking about different components of universal meals. So if you don't have that on your calendar, please do get it on. We did send out a listserv with the Zoom link. I believe it went out on Friday morning, and it's also posted on our Nutrition What's New page, so you can always go back and reference it there. Some of the areas that we are preparing future topics for down the line, and Robin touched on this, is, preparing for that CEP application. What's the legwork that needs to be done to make sure that the application is ready, maximizing those direct certification numbers, being able to get to that minimum 40% ISP and being eligible for community eligibility. We know that school breakfast participation has always been a challenge, as well as reducing food waste. Those are two topics that we're going to cover on our November 2nd town hall. And then for our upcoming listening session, excuse me. And then successful participation in these programs for school districts that are small. We know that there are a lot of unique challenges for districts based on their size. And so, if you're the food service director and you're also the vice principal, and maybe you coach the baseball team, how can you make this program work? And so that'll definitely be an area that we're going to be touching on as we continue to plan out these listening sessions. So here's just, our next call coming up is going to be on the 2nd. We're going to skip the December call in lieu of the holidays, and keep an eye out for our announcement with the date for January. But I do believe we're going to be covering some CEP and direct certification best practices. I know January seems early, but April 1st is just right around the corner. I did mention earlier, we do have a Universal Meals Q&A inbox that we have set up. It's Universal Meals sy22@cde.ca.gov. We do have staff that monitor the inbox. This is really a great way for you to get answers to your questions, but also for us to get input. A lot of the questions that we see that come up have really helped us to develop kind of our first round of frequently asked questions. And we're right now in the process of updating that for the second round. So I'll take questions here at the end of this call, but as you're thinking about implementation of universal meals, if there are things that come to mind, questions, concerns, ideas on implementation, this is really the best way to make sure that we hear those. I think that kind of covers it on my end, Amanda. I'll go ahead and turn it back to you.
Thank you, Gurjeet, and thank you for being available for Q&A at the end too.
Yeah.
Really appreciate that. Okay, so next up, we would like to welcome Jess Bartholow. She is the Chief of Staff for Senator Skinner's office. And Jess, I believe you are going to give us an update on just what's happening in the legislative process. We are all ears.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, and congratulations for your for your regular convenings and for creating this community of people that all have the same goal, and making sure not only that children don't go hungry, but that they have what they need to be successful at school. For my boss, who is the first time budget chair this year in the Senate, she was a budget chair in the Assembly, and when she served there, she had the opportunity to kind of walk in the door and figure out what would be her top priorities, what groundbreaking, shifting of policy could she help to lead as budget chair in the 3 to 4 years she has in the space. And it was very quick that she settled on universal meals as being one of those things. And this isn't new for her. This is something she's been talking about since 2013. I think that was the first public kind of documentation of her interest in this area. But what we had that was really unique in this year was her walking into that new role and knowing that she had 100% partnership in trying to achieve this with Pro Tem Atkins. You are so lucky to have her represent you in the Senate and as a leader in the Senate out of San Diego. She's so committed to equity and to working families and to ensure that low-income kids have everything they need. She was a really big part of establishing the universal meals as an early kind of policy goal in this year's budget. And as we, after we met very quickly with her and her team, we started thinking, well, who is it that's going to say no to this proposal. Even before we got a chance to reach out to him, Superintendent Thurmond called and said, hey, I heard you guys are doing this. You know, I'm on board. Our superintendent, who himself grew up in need of government food programs to meet his basic needs. And we started to think about the assembly, and we have, Speaker Rendon from an immigrant blue collar community. We had Chairman Ting in the budget on the other side, again, another huge champion. And so it just, and Gavin Newsom and the first partner, have been longtime supporters of this idea. And so it was so easy for us to know that we had partners, and this is something that we actually could achieve. The budget windfall that we had was unexpected. When my boss was appointed chairperson, it was the last week, we found out the last week of November. And, it was a really happy. I was proud of her and us as a team, but also I'm very sad and kind of blue about what I thought we were going to have to do, which was make a lot of cuts. And within 3 weeks after that, we started to hear about the excess dollars we had in the budget, and believe that this was actually achievable. I'm going to post something in the chat just to make sure you all know we didn't do it ourselves. Like, once we started to clear the decks, we started to check in with partners out in the community. Here's the last letter that went out on the topic to Governor Gavin Newsom in June. You can see all the organizations, the huge swell of the community. Everybody was ready for this change. And in the bill itself, the bill that we were working with as the kind of placeholder bill, SB 364, we had every member that had ever introduced legislation on this topic was a co-author of the bill. And this was the only bill that was heading into the governor's office, which really helped us to kind of solidify the block and say, look, if you're going to do something on school meals, we want universal. And so it's here to stay. We have funding. We worked really closely with the superintendent's team, with Gurjeet and his colleagues, to get the language just right, to get the appropriations just right, 650 million. We are standing by to see if, this has never been done before, so we need to make sure these are the right dollars. So we're monitoring that closely and having monthly check-ins with the CDE team. It's possible that the federal government takes some action that could be helpful for us cost-wise, either by expanding CEP or by doing what we believe they should do, and what we've done here in California for 1/12 of the nation's children, which is create a universal meal program federally. We hope they will take that action. And it's not just create the universal meal program. As you know, children across the country are currently experiencing universal meal through the end of this year due to the COVID support that they're getting. And if the federal government fails to take this opportunity to make that a forever thing, they will end up taking away meals from children who have benefited from it throughout the COVID pandemic. And that it just seems unthinkable. It was unthinkable to us here in California. So we're still encouraging everybody to continue your great advocacy out there in DC. And I know my boss actually, I'll put a link to the letter before, but she's written letters to Congress to urge them to take that step. So what happens next? In part, it will be what happens in DC. If DC returns to a universal meal program in the year after this one, then we'll have some additional dollars to put forward in this work. We hope that we can retain the investment into the school meal program, and we can talk about what would be the priorities to investments for that. Even if we expand CEP and make CEP stronger as a reimbursement mechanism, California could benefit from that as well. Short of any changes federally, we still have what's looking to be another healthy year in the budget with additional unallocated dollars that we could think about where they might go in this context. For my boss, she's up at night thinking about the fact that we've created now this very large investment in purchasing of foods, and she would like to make sure that we're purchasing them in ways that support other goals that are important to her, to the governor, to the pro tem, and other members of the legislature, including growing and food delivery processes that are healthier, that are more regenerative in their practices, that are organic and better for workers, and that support disadvantaged farmers. So we've been having some great conversations with various secretaries and members of the administration to think about what else we could be doing in this place. Are there additional reimbursements we could give that could support purchase of regenerative farming practice grown foods, and those are the conversations we're having right now. I apologize to Gurjeet, who hasn't heard this yet, but expect that we'll be having those conversations in our next check-in. And then the rest of it is to hear from you all. The questions that you pour in, we hope you will attend those meetings, those webinars that CDE is doing. I was attending the last one, was thrilled with how that came out. It was beautiful. And the questions, there's a couple of clarifying things we need to take care of. One of them elevated pretty quickly, which is what do you do on the 2-meal requirement when there's a shortened food day? We had an opportunity to clarify that, and we discussed doing that in the August budget actions that we took. But Senator Skinner really wanted to make sure that we've explored all options to perhaps have that second meal be a take-home, be a grab-and-go meal, if that's a possibility. So we're looking into that as an option and seeing if there's a federal waiver we can request to achieve that. And then we maintain the 2-meal option in a shortened day, but the second would be a grab and go. So that's what's happening here. If people might want to know what's happening with 364, it's a bill that's still alive. And so in that space, we are thinking about building out some of these other secondary priorities in school lunch policies. So with that, I'll go ahead and stop, and I am available as well to stay on for questions and answers. And I just want to say, none of the story of universal meals in California, it is a story of a very dogged anti-hunger movement, and very strong partnerships with the anti-hunger movement and the school food providers and the unions that serve the food and the school districts and everybody that it took at the legislature. It took lifting people who'd been poor as children to become leaders in our legislature to really embrace this idea. It is truly the story of California, and we're so proud to be part of it and of this incredible moment in time. And so I want to thank you for all that you've done to help make that happen as well from San Diego.
Thank you. Thank you for that beautiful ending and all your hard work. We are now going to open up for a Q&A. So Jess, thank you for answering some questions already in the chat. That was fantastic. Trying to see if we have one question in the chat from Emily Sina in Ramona. Will the CDE be revising their sample eligibility letters to explain to families what their eligibility actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. So, on our long list of workload tasks and activities is to kind of not just go through specifically eligibility letters, but a lot of the sample documentation that we provide to make sure that it is relevant. Now, I talked a little bit about this with, designing this program in a manner in which we are maximizing federal reimbursements. And so we will be making updates, but we also have to make sure that we are still in compliance with all federal guidelines and requirements. But yes, you can expect to see lots of updated job aids, tools, sample communications for families. You can expect to see a lot of that stuff coming in the springtime.
Thank you. All right, everyone, who has a question? Anybody out there would like to pose a question? Feel free to unmute yourself, or you can put it in the chat. I thought I heard somebody unmuting.
Okay, this is Sally, and I'm just having like this thought exercise. So say you have a school that has maybe 30 or 25%, so you don't want to get on CEP. So that leaves, and you don't really have to get on a provision, do you? You don't have to, right?
Right, Sally. So in that example, the reason that it's the 40% ISP requirement is because that's what the current federal minimum is for CEP. So let's say a school district is at 30%, the feds say, well, you can't participate in CEP. You're too low, free and reduced. The district would have the option to establish a provision 2 base year, that there's no minimum qualifications for provision 2. So if they wanted to take, to get some of the benefits of streamlined administration, provision 2 would be an option. But the requirement for them to be on a provision would not apply because they're below the 40% threshold.
Okay, so I'm thinking, like if you were that district and you went on provision 2, then would you actually do better to do that? Because at breakfast time, especially, because really only like the super hungry kids come to breakfast before school. So you would have like a higher free and reduced category if you went on provision 2 than if you didn't go on provision 2. This is why this is a thought exercise. I'm just trying to like think my way through this. Does that sound? Yeah.
And and also remember, so the way that the legislation is set up, regardless of whether or not you go on provision 2, you will still get the free reimbursement level for all those meals that you serve. So you'll be made whole one way or the other. It's really about making sure that all children have access to both of those meals. But in that instance, we are not mandating a provision participation.
Okay, I'm just saying as not just a lunch person, but as a hardworking California taxpayer, if if I could stick more of the money to the feds than to the state,
Yeah, I would just jump in here too, and I want to put on a little. I like your thought exercise because it made me wonder. Gurjeet, we should talk about if the feds change their, what makes a CEP. We need to make sure that our trigger, because the law says if you're eligible, you have to do it. So we'd have to make sure that our trigger doesn't, it has a timeline, right? Because if a school is newly eligible for CEP, then we'd want to make sure they have the time to do all of the things to become CEP. So that's something to put on. And I guess none of us actually know, it could be with the budget, for example, in California, we didn't know if we were going to get this approved, for the year after the current until July, or the end of June. And so we recognize that's not a lot of time to like build up staff and get get the kids coming who should be coming. And I guarantee there are some very hungry kids who aren't coming to breakfast, either because of stigma or because of transportation or not knowing about the program, or being on that edge of, their parents make 185% of poverty, but they're still just not even able to pay their rent. So I think part of this is just feeling out what changes does making something universal actually have to the breakfast program and the lunch program, and trying to make sure we're adjusting as needed within changing federal context as well.
Thank you. All right, we're going to put up a couple questions that we've heard privately, just if people are a little reticent to unmute themselves. Sally, we love your outgoing spirit, but not everyone is as brave as you, ma'am. So here's some questions that we've received privately. So the first one is, how far is that 650 million really going to go? And we touched a little bit on that, but what do we think out there?
Can I had a comment of, I think is very related to this, and that is that historically, any directors that are here in the room, and certainly discussions amongst my colleagues, typically it's not unusual, and believe me, this isn't meant as a criticism for any of you that are working in Sacramento for us, but it's not unusual for our reimbursement rate, our state reimbursement rate, to be significantly reduced in April and May and June, particularly May and June, because not enough money's been allocated. I'm not exactly sure how or why that happens. I understand it was because it wasn't predicted properly at the beginning of the year how much money was going to be needed. That could really, so a lot of us are thinking, okay, well, this is going to be great up until May, and suddenly there's not going to be any money left, and we're not going to get anything from the state. I wondered if that type of, I guess I'm throwing that out as a thought process that a lot of directors such as me are gonna be going through, and I'm curious to know how far that 650 million is really going to go, because it doesn't sound like, it kind of sounds a little short to me, but I don't know. I just wanted to piggyback on that question. Thanks.
I don't know if that's a question or a comment. It's something I can talk about. I think it's a real question of like, did we estimate right? And the good news is, I think that it's a question that everybody's hoping we can adjust for in the coming year if it's not. So we're waiting, kind of waiting to see how's this look. It will change a lot if we end up getting a better CEP outcome out of the feds or universal out of the feds. Then it's a whole different story. So it is hard. I recognize it's hard for people making staffing decisions, purchasing decisions, and all the things you guys have to decide, to not have an answer to that. But from our perspective, you have people in the budget process that are waiting to hear, do we need an extra? But the other thing I guess I would point out is the law says that 2 meals are needed. So it's a bit different in that the legislature is requiring these meals be served and to every child who asks for one. So our obligation and our responsibility to help make sure the reimbursements are there is a little bit more than maybe it's ever been before. So I guess I hope that gives you some comfort, in addition to the fact that we've got a good year ahead of us. And so as long as we're targeting it right, we should be able to get in and make sure there's enough for reimbursements.
Thank you. I appreciate those comments, and I'm very excited about this program and the possibilities that it represents. Absolutely no doubt about that. Just makes our budgeting a little bit more of a question mark when we're not quite sure if we're going to be seeing those checks in May and June. But as you mentioned, perhaps the legislature will step up, since they're the ones who are really putting this law out there. But I do appreciate your comments. Thank you.
Okay, next up, is this a permanent plan? So and that's a hanging question, considering how it came through. So what is the permanence of school meals for all?
It's here. It's here until there's a law passed by the legislature and signed by the governor to take it away. So based on how popular it is and how many kids are, and how much people like this across the state, I would hate to be the legislature and governor that would have to do that. And I I'm just not sure I can imagine that happening. This is recorded, so if it does, you can play this video.
We'll play that part too. Just kidding. Go ahead.
And I think some of that question may have come in because, and we're calling it school year 22-23. And so I think just to be clear with, we were strategic in designing this because we know launching this for one in a state of our size, it's going to take a year of planning, but also we're fortunate that the feds are covering the universal meals for the current school year. And so maybe that's what makes folks think, oh, is this just a one-time thing? No, it is, it's in education code. It is law.
And I would say the feds and the state also pitched in 50 million plus some to make sure that, because we understand that implementing universal meals actually costs more than the feds gave us. And so we threw in a little bit extra for this year and then 650 annually beyond.
Great, thank you. All right, we got a question from the chat. It's a little bit more technical. So to go P2, a district would have to collect applications for the base year, correct? I'm asking parents to fill out an application after everyone is already free could be super tough.
Yeah, so if you meet that 40% threshold and you decide that provision 2 is the route to go, yes, for that base year to establish those percentages, you do have to collect meal applications and establish a monthly free, reduced, and paid rate. And this kind of dovetails into the third question that you have on your screen there, Amanda, is how do we explain to parents that they still need to fill out applications? And I'm not a food service director. I'm not that smart. I don't have that skill set, but I thought Stephanie Bruce really painted this really well in our first listening session of, the approach to getting meal applications or alternative income forms really has to be a broader push than just nutrition services. A lot of districts, I think, Manish, actually, you guys have in LA have a great More Than a Meal campaign, including this type of documentation and packets that go home to families, at the end of the school year, and just making it a part of the normal process so that families are submitting those forms and being open with them and explaining your kid's going to get a meal no matter what, but if you submit these forms, our district is going to get more funding in LCFF, and that ultimately means more support for your child. I think the other piece that Stephanie also indicated was that the district really pushed electronically, gathering this information. So, if you go the route of CEP and use those alternative income forms, the federal requirements of how you collect all the information are not there. So you can be very flexible in generating a form that's very easy for families to complete. That's where we're fortunate to live in a technology age where, a smartphone has the ability to fill out a very simple form very easily. I don't know that there is one answer to this question, but I think there are a lot of strategies that we can implement to get the messaging out to families that it's more than a meal. So sorry, Manish, I didn't want to steal that, but that is a really good, really good moniker.
Yeah, and I think also the good news is if you didn't watch the CDE's first webinar, the good news is there's a lot of school districts across the state who have been doing CEP and been collecting forms and found successful ways. So we don't have to make it up. There's a lot of great examples out there that are working, and you all get to learn from each other on how to do that and how to do that best. And some of you will do it better and teach others. So.
And Manish said we could steal every idea he's ever had. So we're good. We're good. More than meal. It's all ours to use. All right. So our next question here. So, understanding this year's already tough. Any ideas for supporting current and potential future nutrition staffing shortages and supply chain issues?
We do have a blog post on that on Lunch Assist that is right there on the front page. Did a lot of research and tried to put all our ideas that we could come up with on there, if you have a chance to check it out.
I was going to say too, CDE put together a little letter on supply chain shortages, and just to reinforce that though they came at the same time, they kind of arrived around the same time, the supply chain shortages would have happened with or without the universal meal programs. They're related to broader COVID issues. Being the senator is also on the select committee on the ports that is chaired by Senator Lina Gonzalez, and the chairwoman has been and her team have been talking to the president and his team and the vice president and her team and trying to address these supply chain issues. She represents the port in Long Beach. We obviously represent the port in Oakland. We went out and did a port tour, and there are lots of trucks lined up waiting and ships waiting. And so it's hard to watch kind of in person and also know how it's impacting you. One of the things I saw that is actually makes us happy is that the school districts that have built relationships with local food producers, which is, again, part of this initial vision of closer, more sustainable, more fair agriculture, and trying to support that through the school meal programs. Those school districts that have created those relationships are less interrupted by the supply chain problems. And so hopefully we'll give a little wind at our back to continue to support those movements in the school nutrition programs. As far as, you know, the worker supply chain, we would love, the legislature would really love to hear if there were ideas for how to do that. I don't know if there's like signing bonuses or additional employment and training opportunities or anything like that. The senator really supports the investments for women workforce and a predominant, you know, women are predominant in this workforce. And so I think, and the other thing that's really neat is a lot of times the people who work in this workforce are also in their own community. You know, if you invest state dollars in this workforce, you're not investing them in another state or country. You're investing them here in California among people who will mostly spend their money in their own communities. So we have last year, the Women's Caucus, which my boss is the vice chair of, asked for and supported budget funding that would pay $200 million for women in the trades, because there'll be more money in infrastructure and in the trades. And we wanted to make sure that women got a fair chance in those spots. And we were looking for something to support the workforce for this group of workers and any kind of school personnel, but didn't find a kind of proposal. We'd be really interested. Is there something else out there that we can support? So please let us know.
I love that you asked that question. Sorry, Gurjeet, go ahead.
You are quick on the draw. I just wanted to share, I did drop into the chat a letter that we sent out, not just to food service, but also to superintendents and chief business officials on the supply chain and labor shortages and the impact it's having. We do talk about, you know, some strategies. Amanda has dropped one that's, you know, great in the chat there, you know, working, you know, with doing local procurement. You know, it's not a fail safe. It won't catch everything, but it, you know, you do have a little bit more, if you have a stronger relationship with your local farmer, you may be a little less impacted. And I know they can't provide everything, but that is one option. And then also knowing, you know, the meal pattern waivers. You know, we 100% support high quality nutritious meals, but if you simply don't have the food, you've got to be able to provide the best that you can. And so, you know, just know that, you know, those meal pattern waivers are still available. And we've streamlined our approach to those. So it's a one-time opt-in for the year rather than having to do multiple opt-ins. So yeah, I just wanted to share that as well.
And I'll also just add, and hopefully you've heard from CDE, but we did put some money in the budget for building out more kitchens so you could do more scrap cooking. Obviously, if you purchase more food locally, it might also mean that you don't have as much, that you're preparing the food yourselves. That's the idea that we'd like to promote. And so we did have $150 million in the budget to help support that. We recognize you could probably gobble that up and then more. So we're hoping that that there'll be news from CDE that that's indeed the case and that they've identified $150 million worth of those dollars already be spent. And I think, I hope there'll be another request for additional funding in this space. And if so, I hope we can, that we could fulfill that request. If the demand is out there for additional things. The only thing I'm a little worried about is that the supply chain might also impact the ability of the schools to build out, anywhere from the wood and drywall to refrigerations and stoves might be also impacted by the supply chain, and so might slow us down in that space as well.
Also want to add, I put a resource in the chat from Nook and Hungry. We have a quick resource on tips for navigating supply chain disruptions. And we actually also just hosted a national webinar on supply chain disruptions. It actually broadcast at 12:30 today. So it's over now, but check in with our Center for Best Practices website as, in the coming days, as they will post the recording.
Thank you, Robin. So crew, we did hear a specific, ask if anybody has any requests or any ideas for supporting your staff shortages. We know that's been a topic that's come up multiple times. If anybody has a solution that you think would make sense for addressing staffing shortages, share it with Gurjeet and Jess right now if you have any ideas. You know your staff best. Anyone? Bueller? All right, you can also submit them via email as well. All right, I want to honor that we are at 3 o'clock. Okay, so, oh, thanks, Jess. Thanks for putting that in the chat. All right, we're at 3 o'clock, and I just want to say thank you to our esteemed colleagues and experts and presenters. We really appreciate your time and lived experience in bringing it to this table. Join us next month on November 15th. We're going to have some folks from CDSS here joining us to talk about CACFP. So come on back, don't be a stranger, and thank you again for your time and for participating, and have a fabulous Monday. Bye all.
Thanks, everybody.